To start recording. Well, thank you, Dr. Subedi, for joining us today and talking to our students about your writing practices. I have been familiar with Dr. Subedi's work ever since I was a graduate student. Dr. Subedi was at Ohio State and used to come at our university at that time, University of Georgia. We used to have a qualitative research conference early in January, and they used to come and present their work. And I saw lots of overlapping intersections with your work, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation. So I want to first thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be part of this.
Thank you. So what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is what are some of the things that you do to get your writing done in a regular, disciplined way?
Yeah. So that's really a tough question. I think what I do is I block time. And block time is like, especially when I'm teaching classes semester, I usually have about 2 days, 3 days, I completely block it out. So that might be Friday, that might be Tuesday or Saturday, whatever it might be. And the block is usually about 3-4 hours, right? That's what I think. If I can devote 3-4 hours straight on writing, that would really help my work. And, if I can get one paragraph out a day, 1 page a day, I'll be very happy. But it's the distractions, that really helps me out in terms of thinking through the issue. And I think you raised this question to me as well earlier, is that I write first. I don't worry about citations. I don't worry about scholarship. I just write, and then I read. I go back to scholarships. That's when I bring the scholarships back in. And the scholarships are really important because I can rely on quotes, ideas, people. Those are the things I bring it later. First, I get my thoughts across, because if I start with a quotation, sometimes I just can't go anywhere. So for me, the writing part on my own is really, really important. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I can understand that enough. Often this would be helpful for our students to hear, because a lot of times the students get stuck in the academic technicality of moving in and out of quotations and paraphrase stuff and citations and things like that. And they often feel like they don't really have they lose their voice. Like they forget what they're trying to say. They don't have an argument well built, because I could read a paragraph and I read citation after citation, and it feels like it's a data dumping, but I don't know what the argument is in that paragraph. So this is helpful for them to hear. So when you begin that process, do you have any outline created, like I want to talk about this, or you just start writing and see what happens?
I usually, what I do is, for example, when I tell my students, or when I do my research, is I ask them, what are your findings, or what are some of the key ideas you're thinking about? And a lot of times what I find useful is I have a notebook. I usually write on it. I'm, trying to figure out what the ideas are. So the idea for me to just go on the computer and start writing just does not work. So I have this laid out, I map it out, I have it on my walls, I have visuals, like boxes and circles, what connects where. So I usually zoom into one part of that and say, I'm going to write about this today, right? The writing is never random for me, especially if I'm trying to write for journals. It's usually I'm thinking about something that I have laid it out, and I want to focus on that particular topic. So for me, the mapping part, handwriting it in a pencil, I map it out earlier. So that really helps me out, because, sometimes I could get in the computer and just sit there for 5 hours and not even get a sentence out.
Right.
So I feel more organized if I have this laid out. This is exactly what I'm going to write today. Is that very similar to yours?
I move back and forth. I think of sometimes I completely want to surrender to writing is this process of inquiry and analysis sort of stuff that Richardson and St. Pierre talk about. And other times I'm like, oh my God, I could write for days if I don't put a little bit of structure to this. So then I would go back and start doing some sort of outlining, some sort of mapping of ideas, and then come back and see what can go in this paper and what can go in another paper or another thing. For example, for the AERA paper that we submitted to Nina, by the time I was finished, I had 76 pages. I'm like, I have so
Yeah.
much to say, but they don't all go in one paper.
Yeah.
So how do I bring in a focus to that? So then I had to like go back in. So I think I moved back and forth between
Yeah.
wanting to submit to a process of analysis and inquiry and see what happens, and then feeling like, oh, I am going in so many different rabbit holes. I need to maybe come out. And it's mostly a time issue for me because we're
Yeah.
under
Yeah.
deadlines, so then I feel like I won't get it done by this time if I just give myself the luxury of doing this. But ideally, if I could take a sabbatical and just write
Yeah.
and just see what happens if I write and see where I go with it, that would be kind of interesting to see without having any stake in it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
definitely agree with you. I tried to balance that as well. So, I was thinking, but I'm doing research in school now, one particular school, and the school has a lot of visuals like
Mm.
signs and all kinds of things. So I thought about if I could focus on this one particular sign or this one image, I'm just going to focus on that today or this week.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So I'm trying to be very similar to your situation. I have so much writings in my laptop and my hard drive.
Mm.
I'm trying to sort it out, where to move things around. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Trying to be a
Yeah.
little bit more strategic in my writing. But I
Yeah.
definitely agree with you that the free flow is so important in a lot of ways. That's where the creativity comes in a lot of times.
Yeah. Yeah.
I find that very useful.
One of the things my students mostly find challenging is when they get to the findings place,
Yeah,
and during qualitative research, and they want to write up this finding, and they have to think about the raw data they collected, but then there are other things they have to bring to bear: the
yeah,
theory, the analytical framework, the literature review, the research purpose and questions, and somehow create this engaging representational piece, in some way that is thick and rich and insightful and full of, you know, um, push and pull and tension and all of these things. And that requires a very high skill level to write like that. and
yeah, yeah.
and as dissertation students who are writing their dissertation for the first time, that's where they often find it most challenging. So what kind of work do you do with your students to help them navigate that?
I think that's a very tough one. I think it's just because the dissertation part can be so challenging in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And I think my students really find it difficult that, they have so much data. What do you do with all this data? And I tell them you need to narrow it. Always write articles later from your data, but you just need to sort of narrow it in a lot of different ways
Hmm.
so that you can really focus on maybe some of your findings. So then I see some dissertations that are very, very long,
Hmm.
and that committee members are sort of get kind of anxious about that, right?
Hmm.
So I think it's also based on discipline issues, what kinds of products you're producing, and I see this in different departments as well. Their dissertation formats are very different than ours,
Hmm.
right? I think we still follow the traditional one, chapter 1, chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, and so that's a kind of trying to get students a little bit disciplined at the same time, giving them a little bit leeway is I find that very, very useful in a lot of ways. But I tell them, just think about focus, and try to lay out your arguments for your findings, and that can be tough, especially people who are trying to do qualitative work to claim that finding, right? And show us the data and analysis part. So the analysis, I find that to be very useful. You know what I mean? Rereading issues through
Hmm.
theoretical lenses, and I find that to be very rich sort of conversation.
Yeah.
So
I find the students have the hardest time doing descriptive, rich narrative writing, you
yeah,
know, and then bring theory to bear, because they have a really hard time thinking theory and analysis and representation
yeah,
simultaneously.
yeah, yeah,
Like if it were to say, like, here's my finding, here's my theory, here's my analysis, they can do that better
yeah,
than to do that in an integrated way. But most of the time we are integrated like that.
yeah,
When we say something, we just, in our everyday lives, we are theorizing and analyzing and telling a decent narrative simultaneously. But it's that bridging in this academic space I find them
yeah.
challenged most. Do you have students who have prior narrative writing experience, or are they writing it for the first time?
For the first time, especially the academic writing part is very, it's very has its own boundaries and limitations and possibilities. So So a lot of students are sort of really struggle with this aspect because I think perhaps, because of their prior experiences, the writing is not very well emphasized, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost, especially the academic part of it. So it's a kind of a challenge. The other challenge that I think you mentioned earlier for me has been in my work is issues of representation, right?
Yeah.
Which is huge in a lot of ways. And I have always struggled about writing in the sense of how do I write about marginalized communities, right? So
Right.
when I
Right.
do research related to that one, and I really, Linda Tway-Smith's work was very important to me in thinking about
Mm-hmm.
how important it is to think about representations, how we
Mm-hmm.
represent communities of color, marginalized communities in society. And this
Mm-hmm.
is a question I think that, you've talked about this as well, is that it's not necessarily mainstream writers have to worry about as much because they don't think about it too much, right? But for
Mm-hmm.
us, it's a really an important issue about being accountable, right? And the difficulties, the challenges we go through. Should I represent this way, that way? How should I be accountable, right? And having that feeling of I can't do it, and at the same time thinking that I have to do it, right? So I think that's a kind of an issue that I think it's really important to talk about with our students, especially who are researching within communities of color, marginalized communities, and how to represent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was also thinking about, and I think you'll definitely relate to this, is I have struggled with, the possibilities and the limitations of writing in English, right? Us being
Yeah.
bilingual folks who know
Yeah.
multiple languages, and how does that sort of perpetuate the dominance of standard English, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's been a concern for me, and especially I have students of color, especially international students. This is a topic that we often talk about, the violence of that.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if we privilege standard English as a sort of a way to producing, disseminating knowledge? Not that we don't contest it, right? But it's also a very important issue, I think, in terms of thinking about doing qualitative work. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I do, and in the paper that I wrote for Nina, I talked about disrupting. I actually have a lot of disruption in that paper, and I speak with, bring in a lot of Bengali sentences
Yeah.
that I don't translate. Just leave it as is. It's I've learned that from Gloria Anzaldúa because she does that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
She just doesn't translate. You're not her audience. If you didn't get it, then sucks to be you. Go do your work, learn some Spanish. you know
Yeah.
so I like that she had done that, so she's given me permission to do that. Anybody come, I don't italicize. If I use like a Bengali word, I don't italicize that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I just leave it as is. But I also note there and elsewhere too that I'm complicit because I'm still making my arguments in English,
Yeah. Yeah.
and and if I ever wanted to make the same arguments in Bengali, I wouldn't know how to, because
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have the formal academic training to think and imagine that way. So I wouldn't know how to. So I'm limited even in accessing my own heritage language.
Yeah.
So I don't know, like if I got a Fulbright and went to Kolkata to teach at a Bengali university, the same thing that I do, research, qualitative research in Bengali, I won't be able to do it,
Yeah.
you know?
I feel the same way. I've been invited to a couple of communities here in where I work, in the community, and also back in Nepal where I was born and educated. And
Yeah.
I've been in settings that I have to deliver my talk in Nepali, and I really struggle. And
Yeah.
I think that has to do with the way we've been socialized into
Yeah.
academic institutions in the US and the kinds of violence that has created. So my talks usually has a lot of humor in it because people find my conversations funny because it has a complicated dialect involved in it between Nepali and English. So it's a certainly some feel I challenged about, and I like to read like to write in Nepali more in terms of have a different audience.
Yeah.
But us being here in the U.S. academia is certainly is a huge barrier in a lot of ways
Yeah.
about producing knowledge and thinking about decolonization in a broad way. So.
Yeah. So are you going to speak in Nepali at the AERA presentation?
I would like to. I would definitely like to. So
Cool.
my research is with communities who are refugees here in the United States, and they're Nepali-speaking people.
Mm-hmm.
So I have shared some of my writings with them, and they thought it was garbage
Yeah.
because it's not accessible and it's academic, and so I'm trying to figure out a way to tell stories. or so that that accurately reflects their experience and also realizing my academic part of it. For me to go for a different level in academia, it has to be in a certain ways of writing. So I'm trying to balance those both out.
Yeah,
So
right. And I find that some of our training came from very privileged spaces in academia, um, where other folks, white folks, can write the way they write and don't have to worry about
yeah,
intelligibility or accessibility, because it creates all these sorts of
yeah,
progress, academic progress for them, whereas we have a very different kind of commitment, and I don't necessarily have a need to write in a way where I gain the legitimacy of the kind of folks that trained us. I
yeah,
want to gain the legitimacy of my people. I
yeah.
want my people to say, this matters. The way you talk about this matters. So right now I'm mentoring a Bengali educational researcher, and I'm trying to talk to her in as much Bangla as possible so that I can figure out how I want to think about this in Bangla
Yes, yes.
instead of in English. So I'm helping her with the study on imposter syndrome. Um, One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was, when you're writing, do you need to write with complete silence, or do you have music or noise around you? Are you at home? Are you at library? Are you at coffee shop? Where are you writing?
So for me, my ritual has always been morning, right? I write in the morning. Nighttime doesn't work for me, so it has to be very early in the morning. So if I can have 4 or 5 hours, I think that is for me the very ideal time, right?
Yeah.
So it has to be often, I would say not always, it has to be a quiet time. And I unplug everything. I unplug internet, email. So it's simply me, computer, or if I'm using notebook, then scholarship, books. I surround myself with books. So that is for me a really an ideal space. So as I mentioned earlier, even before I start using my hands in the computer, I usually have things written down on my notebook, so where I need to go with the conversation. So that really helps me out. Not always, right? But I think that really helps me out. The other one is I also thrive in public settings,
Hmm.
right? So I need a break from the quietness. I usually go to a public setting that I feel comfortable with,
Mhm.
especially culturally. I go to Nepali restaurants and places like that, and I also go to places that are vibrant. And I usually have my headphones with me,
Mm, mm.
but I think it's not. I try to block out the noise. Sometimes I block out, sometimes I don't. But that kind of setting, it's really refreshing for me as well, because I don't. To a certain degree, I like the traditional academic isolation in terms of writing, the armchair kind of a thinking. But I also do really think that these public places, culturally relevant, culturally appropriate places, and I hate to bring food into this, but I think the food part is a very key for me as well. If I have good food, I write well.
No,
It's
no, that's good. I mean, good food and good sleep. People underestimate that.
yeah.
That very
But
important ingredient. Right.
especially if I have chai, chai really moves me, you know what I mean, in a lot of different ways. For me, so culturally relevant food, places, atmosphere is a very, very big plus for me, because I feel comfortable and I'm refreshed, I'm at ease. And that is, so I balance it out between the sort of the confinement of the home. I don't do much writing at work because
Mhm.
it's too many distractions, and I want to have good relationship with my colleagues. But the idea of going into an office and writing for me is probably happens 1% of my writing. Mostly, I would say 60% is at home, and
Mm.
I would say the rest definitely is in a public setting that I feel really comfortable with. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, perfect. It makes perfect sense. I have
Yeah,
a place at Panera Bread that I have to go right. I don't have a lot of desi restaurants here, so I
yeah,
can't do that. But I do have a place at Panera Bread, and I try to get there really early.
yeah,
And if there's somebody sitting on in my preferred spot, because I have a spot, you know, that's my
yeah,
spot, writing spot that has the right amount of light and all of those things that I enjoy.
yeah.
So if somebody ever sits at that spot, I will just be the most annoying pest around them. I will sit right next to their table, and then I will, plug things into the outlet, and so I'll just be this presence right in front of them until they're like, okay, fine, I'm going to another spot, and then I'm on my own spot. People come, go. I hear noise. I block them out. I have my headphones. I do a lot of writing. Most of my writing is in public space. Some are private space, but most of them are in public space too. One of the things I wanted to ask you was, what do you do to up your game?
Yeah, tough question.
Yeah, I
So,
know.
so one thing I definitely attribute this to my writing is I've had a writing group for a very long time.
Mm.
And it's since my PhD graduation, there's a group that I have sort of stayed with. And that group has met, we meet at least about a couple times a year. And sometimes some years it's a little bit low, sometimes it's high, depending on what our schedules are. So the writing group, if anybody is trying to get writing done, I think writing group, I know you do this a lot in your setting as well, has been incredibly helpful for me because I attribute my tenure and everything that's connected to the work I do is connected to the writing group because it's a group that, I feel comfortable sharing my work, right?
Mm.
And who is willing to give me feedback that I would really like to have. And they're generous, they're critical, and they're very blunt, right? So in that way, I think it has really been helpful for me to be accountable. I think in our society, because of the kinds of work we do at the university, lots of teaching, and people of color, it's a lot of service. So this group has really put me through, challenged me and helped me think through these lot of issues and very honestly in a lot of ways, right? So they're not only critical, I think critical is very helpful, but they also have helped me to think about how to get this out, right? Get this thing wrapped up, because we can get really wrapped up, as you well know, in one article for years and years and years and not get it through the system, right? So I think they're good about being critical, but at the same time say, okay, you need to change these things here and here and here, then move on and get it out to a journal, right? So you probably follow the very similar process, perhaps?
I have people, I don't have a writing group, but I have
Okay.
people that I trust that I would send it out to. And I've been working with somebody who has been editing my work since graduate school. So she does very good work. She reads it like a reviewer, you know. So I usually run it through her first. And so she does my copy editing and reads it as a reviewer, you know.
Oh,
So any argument that I need to think in multiple ways, another perspective, she'll point that out, and I appreciate the honesty of it because I don't take it as a personal dig, basically. So she'll point that out. And then, once I'm done, lately this has been my big, very conscious practice. I didn't do this earlier. I would send it to, somebody, a Bengali scholar or a Desi
yeah,
scholar,
yeah,
because I want to imagine them as my primary audience. So I'll send it to them to say, does it make sense to you? And then if they say it does, or you might want to think about that, those are my bigger feedback that I care most about.
yeah,
And then at that point, when I send it, let's say, to a journal and I get some pushback, then I have a way to argue for it because I've already sort of have a cultural insider approval, so that I draw strength from that to respond back to
yes,
colonial empire-based reviews. So I don't, I had people with whom I wrote in graduate school, but they're kind of scattered. They're not necessarily all pursuing academic career that requires writing. One of them is in a teaching school. Another one has was an artist doing science education work, so he's kind of focused back on his art again. So it's not, so that writing group has splintered, from graduate school. So I do writing retreats. So I host these retreats, and people come to these retreats and they become writing comrades during the retreats. But there's just a handful of people that I trust completely, with whom I can exchange my work, and I would trust their feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, I was also thinking about, I think in my pre-tenure context, I used to, big AERA is very big, and other conferences. I actually used to go to these journal talks.
Yes.
And I wanted to really find out how the system worked. You didn't have a whole lot of people of color at that time, and we still don't in a lot of journal places. But that kind of helped me out. I wanted to see who was there and what journal was receptive to your work.
Yes.
And that was really helpful for me because I began to understand slowly how the system worked.
Yeah.
And I in a couple of cases I actually emailed the journal editors as well. Might you be interested in this kind of work? And if there was a positive vibe related to this,
Mm-hmm.
and I send it out. And the other thing I still do is, and I have it right here in my table, is the nasty letters I've gotten,
Yeah.
rejection letters.
Yeah.
So those have always been an inspirational for me, because I think about the rejection letters were not necessarily about, but it was really more about epistemological issues, right? It
Yeah.
really was about what I was writing about, my perspective, my view, our world, right? Our they see world.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the way, that was a form of rejecting, right? It was
Mm-hmm.
not understandable. It was not relevant. So for me, it's always been this inspiration to have these rejection letters, which I have many of those.
Mm-hmm.
That has given me a push. You know what I mean? It wasn't about my writing, but it was my viewpoint that was challenged. And for me, that's always pushed me, to think through this issue that the system is, very much a racist system in a lot of ways, that it serves as a gatekeeper, right? The writing process, the content we write about, our knowledge is. So that has been really, in a funny way.
Yeah.
It's right here with me all the time, because it pushes me forward every day.
Of course, of course. I love it. Thank you for sharing. So what I want to do to wrap up our conversation is ask you to recommend like 3 of your writing that people should read, or my students should read. Um, and it could be in anything. It doesn't have to be writing related. It could be 3 pieces that you think would be helpful for people to read.
So there's one piece in QSC that came out, I think maybe a few years ago. It's called Happy Researcher.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it talks about, the challenges. It's a qualitative work that I did in Nepal.
Uh-huh.
And it talks about the challenges of being, us living here in the United States a lot longer than we lived in Nepal, India.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about the challenges of going home. So it's a piece that I have, put a lot of time and effort in putting it together. That's been very helpful to me. And the other piece that I would suggest is on in race, ethnicity, and education.
Mm-hmm.
About teacher legitimacy, about how Asian American teachers find it very challenging to claim their citizenship, their identity in a very racialized world, right? So I think it's a qualitative work. It has a lot of teacher narratives about teachers claiming spaces in a very white settings. Asian American teachers. So that's what I was thinking about. The last one I was thinking about is it's not a qualitative work, but it's more about how to think about decolonization in a global context. And it's an educational theory article, and it talks about decolonizing the world, decolonizing the global curriculum. And it came out about 3-4 years ago. And I find that to be very useful, because it's the way we understand the world is very much a Eurocentric, racialized world. And our argument that I argue 3 or 4 different frames of reading global, especially global South, and those 3 are the ones that I can think of that would be helpful for, I think, for educational community. So that has sort of that those 3 work has gone a lot of effort into sort of thinking about what I want to write in the future as well.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this and for sharing your thoughts and ideas with me and my students. I know they will definitely benefit from this, and this will be uploaded into YouTube. So if you want to use it in any of your classes, then you're more than welcome to do that too.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.